February 12, 1945. Tinian Island shimmers under a Pacific sun that turns metal into griddles and men into walking puddles of sweat. Lieutenant Edward Lang crouches beside the No. 3 engine of a B-29 Superfortress, his fingers tracing the cooling fins of a Wright R3350 that's been pushed past every limit the manual claims exists. The engine should be dead. By every calculation Boeing ever published, by every temperature chart Lang memorized in training, the cylinder heads should have cracked at 28,000 feet over Nagoya 3 days ago. They didn't. But 35% of the fuel burned just to stay that high, and the bombs scattered across 6 square miles of farmland instead of the aircraft factory they were aiming for. Lang closes his logbook and looks up at the curved silver belly of the Superfortress. Somewhere in those numbers is a different answer, an answer that terrifies him because it works. The son of a wheat farmer doesn't usually end up calculating engine pressures at the edge of physics. Lang grew up in western Kansas, where the only altitude that mattered was whether the grain elevator could see your dust cloud coming down the county road. His father, Charles, ran a threshing operation and taught Edward 2 things: machines don't lie, and when something breaks, you figure out why before you fix it. Edward learned to read bearing temperatures by touch, fuel mixtures by smell, timing by the rhythm of pistons firing in sequence. He could diagnose a carburetor problem from 20 yards away just by listening to the engine cough. When the war came, he enlisted because the Army Air Forces promised engineering school. They kept that promise. What they didn't mention was that the classroom would eventually be a cramped flight deck at 30,000 feet, with Japanese fighters trying to turn his aircraft into a fireball. The 873rd Bombardment Squadron received its B-29s in late 1944. The Superfortress was supposed to be invincible. Pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, 4 18-cylinder engines that could push the beast to altitudes no Japanese fighter could reach. On paper, it was perfect. In practice, the Wright R3350 was a mechanical diva that overheated, consumed fuel like a drunk at a free bar, and required constant nursing just to keep all 4 turning in the same direction. Lang's first mission was a wake-up call. They climbed to 28,000 feet, where the air was so thin the oxygen masks fogged with every breath, and frost formed on the instrument panel, despite the cabin heater running full blast. The target was an aircraft plant outside Nagoya. The bombardier released at the calculated point. The bombs fell, and drifted, and scattered. Post-strike reconnaissance showed hits across 3 miles of countryside. The factory was untouched. The fuel gauges showed they'd burned 2,000 gallons just maintaining altitude. Lang started taking notes. By the 3rd week of February, the pattern was clear and maddening. High-altitude bombing in the Pacific wasn't working. The numbers didn't lie. Lang compiled them obsessively in a leather notebook his sister had sent from home. Fuel consumption at 30,000 feet, 935 gallons per hour. At 28,000 feet, 890. At 25,000, 710. The difference wasn't linear. It was exponential. For every 1,000 feet above 20,000, the engines burned 15% more fuel just fighting the thin air. Then there was the wind. The jet stream over Japan blew its speeds up to 200 miles per hour at high altitude. Bomb aiming became guesswork. Even with the Norden bombsight, even with clear skies, the wind pushed bombs miles off target. The bombardiers joked grimly that they were bombing fish more often than factories. Lang spread his charts across a makeshift desk in the crew quarters. Temperature readings, fuel consumption curves, bomb scatter patterns. His bunkmate, Navigator Tom Hewitt, watched him work. "You know command doesn't care about your math," Hewitt said. "They care about staying alive. High altitude keeps us out of flak range." "High altitude keeps us out of accuracy range too." Lang tapped a graph showing circular error probabilities. "We're burning 3/4 of our fuel to drop bombs into rice paddies. There's got to be a better way." "Like what? Fly lower and let every gun in Tokyo take shots at us?" Lang didn't answer immediately. He was staring at a chart showing Japanese radar coverage. Most of their systems were coastal, aimed high. Their night fighter force was depleted. Their anti-aircraft batteries were concentrated around obvious targets. What if you came in low, at night, when radar couldn't track you and searchlights couldn't find you? What if you stripped the defensive guns to save weight and used that weight for bombs instead? "I need to talk to the captain," Lang said quietly. Captain Raymond Shaw listened to Lang's proposal with the expression of a man watching someone suggest jumping off a cliff to test if humans could fly. They sat in Shaw's quarters, a converted Quonset hut that smelled of cigarette smoke and mildew. Outside, generators hummed and palm trees rustled in the evening breeze. "Let me make sure I understand," Shaw said slowly. "You want to strip our defensive guns, load maximum ordnance, fly at 1,500 meters at night, and trust that the Japanese won't blow us out of the sky. 1,500 to 2,000 meters, sir. Just above effective small arms range but below where their radar can track us consistently. At night, in formation, we'd be nearly invisible. And if they do find us, then we're dead. Same as if we run out of fuel at 30,000 feet and ditch in the Pacific. Same as if we take flak damage and can't maintain altitude. We're at risk either way. Question is, do we want to take that risk while actually hitting our targets?" Shaw lit another cigarette. The smoke curled toward the ceiling fan that barely stirred the humid air. "You've run the fuel numbers? Every scenario. At low altitude, we cut fuel consumption by 40%. That's 800 gallons we can convert to payload weight. Replace it with incendiaries instead of high explosive. Japanese cities are wood and paper, sir. They'll burn. We just need to light the match." "The brass will never approve it. The brass want results. Right now, we're spending billions of dollars to dig craters in farmland. Show them we can actually destroy industrial capacity, and they'll approve anything." Shaw studied Lang for a long moment. Outside, a B-29 fired up its engines for a test run, the sound building from a growl to a roar that rattled the windows. "I'll take it to Major Hendricks," Shaw finally said. "But you better be right, because if this goes wrong, a lot of good men die, and your name goes in the file as the engineer who killed them." Lang nodded. He'd already considered that. The math was solid. The tactic would work. What worried him wasn't whether it would succeed. It was how well it would succeed. The modification work took 3 days. Ground crews swarmed over Shaw's B-29, designated City Slicker, removing the side gun blisters, the tail turret, everything except the tail guns. They pulled ammunition boxes, stripped armor plating, even removed the relief tube to save weight. Every pound mattered. The bomb bay was reconfigured to carry a new mix, M47A1 napalm canisters clustered with M69 incendiary bomblets. The M69s were simple, 6 pounds of jellied gasoline in a hexagonal tube. Drop them in clusters, and they spread like metallic rain, each one capable of igniting wood, cloth, or flesh on contact. Lang supervised the weight calculations personally. The center of gravity had to be perfect. Too far forward, and the plane would be nose-heavy on takeoff. Too far back, and it would be unstable in flight. He measured, calculated, adjusted, and measured again. The final configuration, 26,000 pounds of ordnance. nearly 6 tons more than they'd been carrying on high-altitude runs. The engines would take a beating. The R-3350 was rated for 2,200 horsepower continuous. They'd need to push 2,800 on takeoff just to get airborne with that weight. Lang adjusted the fuel mixture, richened it slightly to keep cylinder head temperatures below critical. He replaced the spark plugs with a fresh set, checked every exhaust valve, and personally torqued every engine mount bolt. If an engine quit on takeoff with this weight, they were dead. Simple math. The night before the mission, he couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, listening to the ocean waves and the distant rumble of generators. Somewhere in the darkness, 18 B-29s were being loaded with 230 tons of incendiary bombs. The target was Tokyo. Not a specific factory, not a specific rail yard. Tokyo. 16 square miles of dense wooden structures in the eastern part of the city. The fire zones. The plan was elegant in its brutality. First wave lights the fires. Second wave expands them. Third wave ensures nothing survives. Come in from different directions to overwhelm the firefighting response. Stay low to concentrate the pattern. Use the wind to spread the flames. It wasn't precision bombing. It was urban area destruction, wrapped in the mathematics of fluid dynamics and thermal propagation. Lang knew the equations. He'd calculated them. Heat rising from fires creates updrafts. Hot air rises at roughly 500 feet per minute in a moderate fire. In an intense fire, that rises to 1,500 feet per minute. The thermal columns would be like invisible walls punching upward through the flight path. Navigate them wrong, and you'd lose lift, lose control, maybe lose the aircraft. Navigate them right, and you'd ride the updraft like a hawk on a thermal. The question he couldn't answer was simpler and harder than any equation. How many people lived in those 16 square miles? How many would die when the M69s did exactly what they were designed to do? March 9th, 1945, 2300 hours. The briefing room on Tinian was packed with crew members who'd stopped joking about an hour ago. Major Hendricks stood at the front beside a large map of Tokyo, marked with red circles and arrows. The air smelled of sweat, cigarette smoke, and the particular tension that comes before men do something they know they won't forget. "Gentlemen," Hendricks began, "tonight we change the war. We're going in low, we're going in at night, and we're going to burn Tokyo to the ground." The room stayed quiet. Hendricks continued, outlining the route, the altitudes, the timing. 334 B-29s would participate, the largest fire raid in history. They'd approach from different directions to split Japanese defenses. Bombing altitude, 5,000 to 7,000 feet. Individual aircraft discretion on exact attack altitude, but stay low, stay fast, and get out before the fires create thermal chaos. Questions? Hendricks asked. A pilot in the back raised his hand. "Sir, without defensive guns, if we get jumped by night fighters, then you're fast and you're lucky. The intelligence assessment is that Japanese night fighter coverage is minimal. They're saving fuel. They're saving pilots. They think we'll keep coming in high. We're going to surprise them." Lang felt Hewitt shift beside him. The navigator leaned close. "Still think the math works?" he whispered. "The math always works," Lang whispered back. "It's the variables that kill you." At 2300 hours, the first B-29s began their takeoff rolls. Shaw's crew boarded City Slicker at 2340. Lang made one final walk-around inspection, checking everything by flashlight. Control surfaces, tires, engine cowlings. Everything looked good. Everything felt wrong. He climbed through the forward hatch and took his station at the flight engineer's panel between the pilots. The instrument board glowed with soft red light to preserve night vision. Outside, the 4 Wright R-3350s coughed to life one by one, their 18 cylinders per engine creating a sound like distant thunder multiplying. Shaw ran through the checklist. Flaps, trim, mixture, prop pitch, fuel selectors. Eddie, you ready? Lang scanned his panel. Cylinder head temperatures nominal. Oil pressure good. Fuel flow balanced. Engines nominal, sir. We're good to go. Then let's go wake up Tokyo. The takeoff roll felt like riding a freight train with square wheels. With 26,000 pounds of incendiaries in the bomb bay, City Slicker needed every foot of Tinian's runway to claw its way into the air. Lang watched the manifold pressure gauges climb past red line into the yellow zone as Shaw held maximum power. The cylinder head temperatures rose. 220 degrees Celsius, 230, 240. At 250, they'd start losing compression. At 260, the heads could crack. They broke ground at 245 degrees. Lang immediately leaned the mixture and adjusted the prop pitch to bring the temps down. Slowly, grudgingly, the needles retreated to 230, then 220. Acceptable. Barely. The formation formed up over the ocean. 334 silver bombers in a loose stream, navigation lights winking in the darkness. They flew north-northwest, staying low, staying over water where Japanese radar was sparse. Inside the aircraft, the crew settled into the rhythm of a long flight. Quiet, professional. Nobody joked. Nobody slept. Lang monitored his engines like a cardiac surgeon watching a patient's vitals during surgery. Oil temps, fuel pressure, vibration patterns. The R-3350 was a complex beast, and at this weight, any failure would be catastrophic. He'd positioned himself as the backup to every system. If something failed, he had a workaround. If the workaround failed, he had an emergency procedure. If the emergency procedure failed, they ditched in the Pacific and hoped the destroyer screen could fish them out before they froze or drowned. At 014 hours, Hewitt called over the intercom. IP in 10 minutes. Starting descent to attack altitude. The IP, initial point, was the navigation checkpoint where they'd begin their bombing run. Shaw eased the throttles back and pushed the nose down. City Slicker descended through the darkness, altimeter unwinding from 8,000 feet to 7,000, then 6,000. At 5,500 feet, Shaw leveled off. Bombardier, you're hot. Through the cockpit windows, Tokyo appeared like a constellation fallen to earth. Street lights, building lights, the glow of a city that hadn't yet realized what was coming. The first wave had already hit. Fires were visible as orange smudges in the eastern districts. Shaw banked toward them. Eddie, I need maximum continuous power. This won't be gentle. Lang pushed the throttles forward and watched the manifold pressure climb. The engines roared, and City Slicker accelerated to 220 miles per hour at 5,500 feet. The bomb bay doors opened with a mechanical groan. Cold air rushed through the aircraft. Then they hit the thermal. The updraft slammed into City Slicker like a fist from below. The bomber lurched upward 500 feet in seconds. Lang's stomach dropped. The instruments went haywire. Airspeed indicators swung wildly. Vertical speed showed a 2,000 foot per minute climb. Shaw fought the controls, pushing the nose down to maintain altitude, but the thermal had them in its grip. "What the hell is that?" the co-pilot yelled. "Heat from the fires," Lang shouted back. "Superheated air rising. It's creating convection cells. We need to get through it fast or we'll stall." Shaw firewalled the throttles. The engines screamed. Lang watched cylinder head temps spike to 245, then 250. He couldn't lean the mixture without losing power. He couldn't reduce power without losing airspeed. The plane shuddered, caught between thermal lift and forward momentum. For 10 seconds that felt like an hour, they rode the edge of a stall. Then, they broke through into calmer air. "Bombs away," the bombardier called. The M47 and M69 canisters fell away in clusters. City Slicker lifted suddenly, freed of 6 tons of weight. Shaw banked hard left, diving to build speed and get clear of the fire zone. Behind them, the bomblets were already hitting. Lang caught a glimpse through the side window, small flashes multiplying like fireflies, then spreading into larger flames as the jellied gasoline found wood and cloth and paper. They climbed to 8,000 feet and turned for home. The entire eastern horizon behind them was glowing orange. Not individual fires, one fire. A fire so large it created its own weather, pulling air inward at ground level and exhausting superheated gas upward in a column visible for 50 miles. Lang's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of his panel to steady them. Hewitt appeared beside him, face pale in the red instrument light. "You calculated that thermal?" he asked. "I calculated the heat output. I didn't calculate ... Lang gestured helplessly toward the inferno behind them. "That. Do we have enough fuel?" Lang checked the gauges. They'd burned 400 gallons more than planned fighting through the thermal. That left them with 2,100 gallons for a 1,400-mile return flight. At low altitude, they'd burn 650 gallons per hour. 4 hours of fuel, 5 hours of flying time. "We need to climb," Lang said. "Now, get to 12,000 feet where the air's thinner and we can lean the mixture." He did the math in his head. If they climbed immediately, if they ran the engines at minimum power, if the winds were favorable, they'd make Tinian with maybe 30 minutes of fuel remaining. Maybe. Shaw made the decision without hesitation. "Eddie, give me best climb power. Tom, plot me the most direct course home. Everybody else, check for damage and pray we don't have any fuel leaks." The climb took 20 minutes. Long, tense minutes where every gauge mattered. They leveled off at 12,000 feet, and Lang immediately leaned the mixtures to minimum power settings. The engines grumbled, but smoothed out. Fuel flow dropped to 520 gallons per hour. Better. Not great, but better. Behind them, Tokyo burned. They landed at Tinian at 0640 hours with 17 minutes of fuel remaining. The tires were smoking from the weight and heat. One engine had developed an oil leak that left a black trail across the cowling. The brakes were nearly gone, and Shaw had to use every foot of runway to get stopped. When they finally rolled to a halt near the hardstand, nobody spoke. They just sat in their seats, staring at nothing, trying to process what they'd done. Ground crews swarmed the aircraft. Maintenance chiefs examined the engines with expressions that ranged from awe to horror. One of them climbed up to Lang's station. "Lieutenant, these engines are done. I mean done. The cylinder heads are heat-cracked. The oil coolers are running at half efficiency." "You got maybe one more mission out of these before they launch themselves." "We made it back," Lang said quietly. "Yeah, you did. Question is, how many didn't? Out of 334 B-29s that launched, 14 didn't return. 42 men dead. Lost to mechanical failure, fighters, flak, or the thermal columns that rose from the fires like invisible pillars of death. The ones that made it back looked like City Slicker. Damaged, exhausted, pushed past every limit. But the reconnaissance photos told a different story. 16 square miles of Tokyo destroyed. An estimated 100,000 dead. Industrial capacity in the eastern districts completely eliminated. The firebombing had worked exactly as the calculations predicted it would. which made it so much worse. Lang spent the afternoon writing his after-action report. Temperature data, fuel consumption, engine performance, thermal column analysis. He wrote it all down with mechanical precision, as if documenting a laboratory experiment rather than mass death. When he finished, he walked to the edge of the airfield and stood watching the ocean. The water was blue and calm and utterly indifferent to what humans did to each other 1,500 miles away. Captain Shaw found him there an hour later. "Command wants to do it again," Shaw said. "Nagoya, then Osaka, then Kobe. They want you to write the tactical manual. The official one, How to Burn Cities. I'm an engineer, sir. I just calculate engine performance. You calculated a lot more than that, Eddie. You calculated how to win the war. They're not going to let that go to waste." Lang didn't answer. What could he say? That the math had been too good? That he wished he'd been wrong? The equations didn't lie. They never lied. Heat plus oxygen plus fuel equals fire. Multiply by density of wooden structures. Factor in wind patterns. Add the collective panic of 100,000 people trying to escape, and you get the answer. The answer was always the same. The answer was fire. Over the next 3 weeks, the 873rd flew 15 more missions. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, then back to Tokyo. Each time, they refined the technique. Shaw's crew became specialists in low-altitude incendiary attack. Lang's manual, officially titled Tactical Guidelines for Night Low-Level Bombardment Operations, circulated through 21st Century Bomber Command and became the standard reference. He'd included everything: fuel consumption charts, thermal column avoidance techniques, engine temperature management protocols, everything except the part about how it felt to calculate the death of a city. The efficiency improved with each mission. 40% increase in destruction per ton of bombs dropped. Maintenance officers complained that the engines were burning out twice as fast. Lang argued that the war would be over before engine attrition became critical. He was right. In August, 2 D-29s dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The fire raids stopped. Lang received a commendation for his technical innovations. It arrived in the mail 6 weeks after VJ Day, along with orders transferring him stateside for discharge processing. He read the citation once and filed it in a drawer. The words, "instrumental in developing effective strategic bombing techniques," felt hollow. Effective. That was one word for it. In October 1945, he returned to Kansas. His family threw a welcome home party. Neighbors congratulated him. Someone asked if he'd killed any Japanese. He said no, which was technically true. He'd never fired a gun in combat. He'd just calculated how to make the guns unnecessary. He lasted 3 months at home before accepting a job offer from Boeing. They wanted him in their engine development division. "Take what you learned in the war," they said, "and help us build better engines for civilian aircraft. Turn military experience into peacetime progress." Lang agreed, but only on one condition: no weapons work. Ever. Boeing agreed. They had plenty of other engineers who'd work on bombers. They only had one Edward Lang. In 1947, Boeing released a technical paper on radial engine performance optimization. The lead author was listed as E.C. Lang, former USAA flight engineer. The paper included detailed charts showing the relationship between altitude, fuel consumption, and power output for the Wright R-3350 and its civilian derivatives. It became required reading for airline maintenance departments worldwide. The paper never mentioned fire raids. It never mentioned Tokyo. But if you looked carefully at the data, you could see echoes of those missions in the temperature curves and fuel consumption graphs. Every chart was a ghost of a calculation made at 5,500 feet over a burning city. Lang never gave interviews. When military historians tried to contact him about his role in developing low-altitude bombing tactics, he politely declined. When Boeing's public relations department wanted to feature him in recruitment materials as a war hero who built the future, he threatened to quit. They dropped it. He married in 1949, Susan, a librarian from Seattle. They had 2 children. He taught his son mathematics the same way his father had taught him, by showing how numbers describe the real world. Distance times speed equals time. Force times distance equals work. Heat plus oxygen plus fuel equals fire. The equations were neutral. What you did with them determined whether you built or destroyed. In 1963, a graduate student writing his thesis on strategic bombing doctrine tracked Lang down at his home in Renton, Washington. The student wanted to interview him about the development of firebombing tactics. Lang agreed to meet, but only to say one thing: the math was perfect. That's the problem. When the math is perfect, you can convince yourself you're just calculating. You're not deciding. You're just optimizing variables. But that's a lie. Every number had a human cost. I knew that. I did it anyway. Not because I was evil, because the math worked. The student asked if he regretted his role. Lang thought for a long time before answering. Regret implies I'd do something different. I don't know what that different thing would be. The war was real. The need to win was real. The calculations were correct. What I regret is that they worked so well. I regret that being right required so many people to die. Edward Lang retired from Boeing in 1978 at the age of 59. He spent his retirement working with engineering students at the University of Washington, teaching thermodynamics and fluid mechanics. His students knew him as a precise, demanding professor who insisted they show their work and question their assumptions. Few knew he'd been in the war. None knew what he'd calculated there. In 1985, a documentary filmmaker convinced him to give a single on-camera interview for a program about the B-29. Lang agreed on condition that they not use his name or show his face. The interview lasted 4 hours. Most of it didn't make the final cut. What remained was a silhouette in a darkened room. An elderly man's voice describing the mathematics of strategic bombing with the emotional tone of someone reading a parts manual. Only at the end did the voice crack slightly. People think engineering is neutral. Mathematics is neutral. But engineering is choice. Every equation you solve, you're choosing what matters. When I optimized those engines for low-altitude operations, I chose efficiency over safety. I chose destruction over protection. I chose the mission over the cost. Those were moral choices wrapped in technical language. I knew that then. I know it now. And I'd do it again because the alternative was losing the war. That's what keeps me awake at night. Not that I was wrong, that I was right. The documentary aired once and was never rebroadcast. Too depressing, the network said. Audiences didn't want to hear about the moral ambiguity of winning. Lang died in 1997 at the age of 78. His obituary in the Seattle Times mentioned his work at Boeing and his teaching at the university. It noted his service as a flight engineer in the Pacific, but didn't elaborate. His technical papers remain standard references in aviation engineering texts. The manual he wrote on low-altitude bombing operations was declassified in 1993 and deposited in the National Archives, where it gathered dust in a box marked Tactical Doctrines Obsolete. But in a filing cabinet in his basement, Susan found his original notebooks from Tinian. Page after page of calculations, graphs, temperature readings, and fuel consumption data. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. In the margins, barely visible, were small notes in pencil. Check this. Verify assumption. Rerun if time permits. The notes of a man trying to be perfect, because perfection meant survival. On the last page, dated March 10th, 1945, a single sentence in ink. The height doesn't matter. The math works at any altitude. What changes is how much you can see of what you've done. Susan donated the notebooks to the Smithsonian. They're stored in climate-controlled archives, available to researchers by appointment. Few request them. The math isn't interesting anymore. The engines are obsolete. The war is history. But the question Lang spent 50 years trying to answer remains. What do you do when your calculations are perfect, your logic is flawless, and the result is fire? The answer, he believed, wasn't in the equations. The equations were just equations. The answer was in remembering that every variable represented something human. Every optimization had a cost. Every increase in efficiency meant something burned hotter. He never found a better answer. He just learned to carry the question. And in the archives, his notebooks remain, silent testimony to the moment when one engineer's precision changed the mathematics of war, and discovered that being right isn't the same as being good.